what is Europe for you, how person from Austria?
For me, Europe, that's my home country. You know, I feel European very strongly, and I can tell you, I studied law in Vienna, and afterwards I studied in Bologna at an American university, the Johns Hopkins University. But then I spent half a year here in Brussels as an intern at the European Commission, and I met so many other. I was young then, you know, I was 25 years old, and all the others also were around this age. And we knew that our fathers probably were shooting each other, you know, they were probably in the war. And now we had the chance to build up this new Europe, you know, to live together in freedom, to live together in peace, and to build this up. And that was, of course, only the western part of Europe in 1981. But for us, it was very important. And for me, Europe is also this development of the last years, of the last decades after 89, that we come closer together, that we discuss our sometimes very difficult history, also very belligerent history, but now we can live together, and it's the most beautiful continent, you know. I think that's the incredible different, you know, when you go from one end to the other, it's so different, and all those many languages and those different people. But it's a wonderful continent, and I'm really very grateful. And I really stress the point. I'm very, very grateful that I'm allowed to live here, and even also allowed to work for a better Europe.
And now some media say that Europe is tired of war in Ukraine. It's really Europe tired of war, or now you don't say?
I'm sorry, but I have to say this is a kind of a stupid sentence. You know, how can Europe be tired of war? I understand that the Ukrainians want peace. You know, I was during Russians and Putin's war against Ukraine. I was there 4 times in different regions, from the very west, from Lviv to Poltava, and also to Kharkiv. I was in Odessa, I was in Mykolaiv, and even east of Mykolaiv, and I was in Kiev, of course. So I saw these different regions, and I really admire the spirit of the Ukrainian people. They don't want to live as Putin's slaves. That's what they tell me all the time. And it's really, especially as an Austrian, I tell you, because, you know, Austrian was a part of World War II, and it was a terrible dictatorship. And the Austrian people did not free itself. We were freed by others. Also by Ukrainians, by the way, you know. When Vienna was liberated in 45 from the Nazis, there were Soviet soldiers, and some of them, and many of them, what I hear, were Ukrainians. So that's also a fact. And you know, as a neutral country, we cannot send weapons, but we can and we have to support you in any way. And I also can tell you and your viewers, there is a strong civil society, and there are many organizations in Austria who really do help. They don't only want to help, they do help. They collect money, they buy cars, they send medicine. The Pharmacists Without Borders are great, and other organizations as well. So I think the majority of the Austrians understands that you need our help, and we are ready to give help.
So how do you think, how many Austrians support Ukraine now?
I'm sure there is, I couldn't say how many, but there is a majority. Of course, there's a huge majority who says we want that the Ukrainians can live in peace. There are, and I have to admit, there are probably many Austrians who say, okay, so why don't they give away some land for peace? And then I always say, who are we to tell them what to do? You know, did we want to give away land? No, we want to live in a free country. Of course, you know, there's the old historic fact about a part of Austria, South Tyrol, which after World War I came to Italy, and there was a very long discussion and fight, should it be Italian or Austrian. And after World War II, after the 50s, it took more than 30 years. to get a very good contract and that people live together freely and they can use their languages and they can travel. But it's two democratic countries. You know, it's Austria and Italy are democratic countries within the European Union. So that's not a problem anymore. But with Ukraine, it's a completely different story.
You already know in which committees you will work in European Parliament?
In European Parliament, I will be in the AFET, that's the Foreign Committee, and in AFCO, that's a committee that is for the reforms of the European Union. And very important, I will be in the delegation for Ukraine. There is one delegation for the important countries and delegation of Ukraine, and I will be in the delegation of Ukraine as well. As I was, I was the chairman of the Austrian Ukrainian Friendship Group of the Parliaments. And that was the official title why I could go to Ukraine many times during the war.
What are your first steps in this committees, in your committee? Yeah.
I mean, the first step already was we had we had our first plenary session we had in July in Strasbourg. Plenary sessions always in the parliament in Strasbourg. And the first we had a very good and strong motion in favor of Ukraine, that for freedom of Ukraine, that we have to continue Ukraine. So that's very important. And yesterday we had a meeting within my liberal group, what we will do in the next steps also. And Ukraine, of course, was part of it. Also Moldova, because there will be elections in Moldova in October, and we say they have to be free elections because the Russians try to interfere there as well. These are for us, these are very important points, but also to organize help, of course, and what can be, and we have to make sure that the help of the European Union will continue for Ukraine, even if people like Viktor Orban say they don't think it's so important or they are against it, but the parliament, the majority, we have to fight for a stable majority in the European Parliament in support for the Ukrainians.
You see now this big war, and how do you think how we can stop Russian President Putin?
You know, that's the $1 million question. One thing, and that I also wanted to mention, what we have to do here, there is an incredible strong influence of Russian propaganda in Western media, in digital media, but not only, also in newspapers. So they are really strong. Not only in the media is one thing, but also like, so-called cultural institutes, Russian organizations. So they still try to influence the people in the West. That's one point. The second point is I think we have to support opposition in Russia. There is I just had a conversation with a woman who lives in Paris, and the organization is called Russie Liberté, so freedom for Russia. And I think I know it's a difficult subject for some Ukrainians. Why can we support Russians? But I think we have to support Russians of the opposition who are really fighting the Putin regime, because I think the only chance will be a regime change, of course, in Russia. But we can't do that. It's the Russian people who have to do that. So that's why I think we have to support those people in Russia and outside Russia who would work for a regime change. And of course, you need the Ukraine needs all the means for self-defense. I think that's the most important thing. They have to defend themselves, and that also means, and what the army is doing right now, of course, to destroy Russian airplanes and rockets and all this stuff, in order that they not can kill people in Ukraine.
So, do you think that now Ukrainians and Europeans must support Russian opposition, good Russian opposition?
I think if there's a good Russian opposition, we also had we tried in the Austrian Parliament to mention all the political prisoners in Russia. Evgeny Kara-Murza was one of them, and I think it's his job now, when he's in the West, to explain the Russian system, the Russian dictatorship. The problem is, there are many problems. One problem is that many people in the West still do not understand that Putin is just a brutal KGB dictator. They don't understand the system because they say, okay, after communism, many things changed. Yes, many things changed. But he built up a strong dictatorship. He talks about Stalin as kind of an example how the society would work again. It's a brutal dictatorship, and I expect, I understand that it's very difficult in Russia to build up an opposition, and we know that many of those opposition people were killed, also journalists, or had to go to prison. But at least outside Russia, I think we have to support organizations who really support the Russian opposition. And also inside Russia, the Russians have to free themselves. I think that's, we cannot do it for them.